Racist cop. Mocks. Elderly black woman. Not knowing she's the most feared. Navy SEAL alive. A white police officer loudly insulted a 74-year-old black woman in the middle of a parking lot, completely unaware that he was disrespecting one of the most legendary Navy SEAL operatives in American history. And that very mistake ended his career. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Gadsden, Alabama, a quiet town where life seemed to have never known the rush. That Monday morning at 9:14 a.m., soft sunlight filtered through the arches of tall trees, casting golden patches onto the pavement of a parking lot near the local shopping center. Cars moved in and out without hurry. Elderly folks carried paper bags. Mothers pushed strollers. Everyone thinking it was just another ordinary morning. But then, a different kind of silence began to take shape. Doris Hawkins, 74 years old, stepped out from a small grocery store, holding a canvas tote in one hand, walking slowly but with steady grace. She wore a light gray coat, her silver hair neatly tied up, her sun-warmed face bearing an expression that held something deeper than age. It carried experience. Her 1991 Buick LeSabre was parked in the VIP section, an old car with faded plates that read DSV 478, short for Dedicated Service Veteran. A police officer, Officer Gunn, in his early 40s, uniform crisp, but eyes full of disdain, approached from a distance, his gaze locked on Doris's car. "What are you doing here? This area's not for people like you." His voice thundered across the lot, loud enough to jolt everyone around, even without a mic. Doris turned her head. She didn't flinch. She didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded slightly, her gaze calm in a way that felt almost unnatural. She didn't argue, didn't move. Something in the way she stared back unsettled those nearby. There was something in her stance, upright, unmoving, as if she were assessing a battlefield. Gunn stepped closer, one hand drifting to his waist, near where his Glock hung. It wasn't an overt threat, but it was a clear show of power. His face began to redden, not from tension, but from the ingrained arrogance of a man used to belittling those unlike himself. A few bystanders began pulling out their phones to record, not because they fully grasped what was unfolding, but because instinct whispered, this wasn't a normal situation. Doris didn't budge. She didn't utter a word. She stood rooted to the hot asphalt, perfectly still. Her eyes, deep, dark, and quiet, locked onto the officer's face, as if tracking every micro-movement. Seconds passed without a single word, but her presence spoke louder than a shout. It was the silence of someone who had seen war and won. No one knew, at least not yet, that this woman once led a SEAL team out of an ambush by 84 Taliban gunmen in Helmand Province, 1997. And now, she stood in a parking lot, not with a weapon, but with the poised stillness of a living legend. No one knew, but everyone could feel it. Something was about to happen. 9:17 a.m. The parking lot was beginning to fill. Bystanders stopped in their tracks. They couldn't hear everything, but they could clearly see the officer's face, angry, condescending, and worst of all, utterly confident in his own untouchability. "I made myself clear," Officer Gunn snapped, his lips pressed tight, legs spread wide like he was restraining a dangerous criminal. "You cannot park here. I'll have a tow truck here in 5 minutes." Doris Hawkins didn't blink. She simply shifted her cane to her right hand and spoke in an even tone. "I'm a veteran. I have a special parking permit." Her voice wasn't loud nor defiant, but in her tone was the calm of someone who had survived real gunfire, not idle threats. Officer Gunn let out a mocking laugh, a sound that scraped against the dignity of decades of military service. Who do you think you are? Some old lady with a shaky cane thinking the law doesn't apply to her? His eyes brimmed with disdain, the kind of look elderly black Americans knew all too well, even into this century. A boy around 14 tugged at his mother's arm and whispered, "Mom, she looks like the woman Grandpa told me about, Seal Hawkins." The mother turned back, stared intently, then fell silent. A flicker of recognition surfaced, an old photograph once featured across Alabama 3 decades ago. A young woman with a mud-smeared face, dragging a wounded teammate from the front lines. The crowd was no longer just passers-by. They were witnesses, recorders, and those waiting for the truth to surface. Sad, an older man sighed. He slowly removed his sunglasses, eyes heavy with memory. "I know that woman. No mistake. That's Doris Hawkins." He stepped forward, eyes fixed not on the officer, but on the motionless woman before him. "She saved my life. Fallujah, 1992. She brought me back, when 7 others didn't make it." The murmurs began to grow. Comments flooded the live stream of a young man filming the scene. Wait, Doris Hawkins? Navy SEAL? Wasn't she part of Operation Night Viper? This cop's about to get hit with something big. But Officer Gunn still didn't realize. In his mind, this was just a stubborn old woman. He lifted his radio to his mouth. "I need a tow at the west lot. Vehicle's parked illegally. Owner is non-compliant." At that moment, Doris looked him directly in the eye. No fear. No flinch. That look, the same one that made a terrorist in Mogadishu drop his weapon because he couldn't withstand the gaze of the black-haired ghost in the night. Now, that look, faded slightly by time, was still powerful enough to silence a uniformed man for one fleeting second. But that single second was the beginning of a justice storm that no one would be able to stop. 9:22 a.m. The atmosphere in the parking lot had shifted, not because of the growing crowd, but because of the strange silence that hummed beneath the noise. No one shouted, yet every gaze, every breath, every heartbeat seemed to sync with one truth. They were witnessing something far beyond a mere dispute. Officer Gunn's face was now flushed red, his hand clenched tightly around his belt, not to draw a weapon, but to cling to what little authority he still thought he had. He roared, "Don't play the law with me. I am the law here." His words echoed, but no longer struck. They fell into an awkward vacuum, where false power was starting to crumble in plain sight. Doris Hawkins still hadn't moved, but people could feel the shift, like gravity itself was changing direction. She lifted her head, eyes deep as an abyss, locking onto the officers. And with a voice as steady as a verdict, she said, "You still don't understand what justice is, do you?" A middle-aged woman nearby, wearing a khaki jacket, clutching a paper bag, murmured through clenched teeth. She once rescued 13 hostages from a terrorist camp in Yemen, 2001. Not a single one was harmed. The person next to her turned in surprise. "How do you know?" "I was one of them." There was no need for more words. Nearly every lens now focused on Doris, not to capture a tense moment, but to record the truth. She still didn't flinch, just for a second. The corner of her mouth curved slightly. It wasn't a smile. It was the quiet recognition of someone who had seen through the soul of the one standing before her. It was the same look she had given a reckless commander in Afghanistan, right before she saved the entire unit. A little boy, about 8 years old, hiding behind his mother with a superhero backpack, tugged on her sleeve and said in a soft voice that rang like a bell, "I think she's a real superhero, like in the movies, but without a cape. No one answered. They couldn't. The air was as tense as water just before a storm breaks. Gunn, now, stepped back half a foot, a survival reflex, not from reason, but from a primal instinct screaming, "The person in front of you cannot be controlled by title or force." Doris looked at him, her gaze cutting straight through. She spoke softly, but each word struck the concrete like iron falling. "I've crossed battlefields where landmines lay beneath every step. I've ordered retreats under fire to save a dying soldier. And I've never failed. Don't test me." In that moment, the crowd froze. A woman dropped her phone and didn't bother to pick it up. A man held his wife's hand tighter. And a police officer began to realize he had crossed a line that should never have been approached. Gunn turned his face away, eyes darting, not searching for an argument, but for a way out. 9:26 a.m. The sun had risen high, casting clear light on every expression of the more than 30 people standing around Doris Hawkins and Officer Gunn. No one spoke anymore. No one dared to interrupt. Everyone waited for something they couldn't quite name. And then it arrived. A man's voice rang out from the far end of the parking lot, firm, clear, and carrying a quiet authority that didn't need to be performed. "Doris Hawkins?" The entire lot seemed to hold its breath. A man in an old olive military uniform stepped out of a dusty Jeep Wrangler. He was in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair, walking with the kind of precision that came from drill fields. On his chest, a unit insignia unmistakable, 10th Airborne Division, NATO. But his eyes looked nowhere, except at Doris. Arlo. Civil rights attorney, former reserve lieutenant, veteran of Kosovo, 1999. The same man who had once appeared on 60 Minutes with a groundbreaking speech on the rights of black veterans. Arlo stopped, gave a military salute. Doris gave a slight nod, their eyes meeting in a moment no outsider could understand. No words were needed, only the mutual confirmation. We are still standing. Then he turned to the crowd, voice thundering like a rifle crack in the air. This woman was my commanding officer. In 1999, Kosovo. I and 46 others survived because of Doris Hawkins. She didn't just save lives. She led our team on foot for 8 miles through carpet-bombed terrain to extract a wounded civilian from the danger zone, under enemy fire. No body armor, no backup, just her heart and her skill. Ask any soldier who's seen combat. They'll tell you, Doris is a living legend. The parking lot fell completely silent. Phones weren't just recording now, they were broadcasting. A local TikToker's live stream crossed 250,000 viewers in just 6 minutes. Twitter, YouTube, Reddit were beginning to shake. Officer Gunn stood open-mouthed, then stammered. I didn't know. I didn't realize she was..." Arlo stepped forward sharply, his eyes like ice. "And that, sir, is the problem. You didn't know because you didn't care to find out. You didn't know because you're used to judging people by age, by skin color, by posture. But she doesn't need a badge. She doesn't need an introduction. She is the definition of service to country, while you were still learning what a traffic light meant." Then he pulled out his phone and opened a legal reader app. His voice was steady and commanding, like in a courtroom. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title II, Discrimination against citizens in public spaces on the basis of race, color, or national origin, is a violation of federal law. And you, Officer Gunn, just violated that, before dozens of witnesses, and now millions watching this live stream. Doris remained silent, but her eyes now glowed, as if years buried under silence had finally found release. Officer Gunn tried to speak. I was just I was just doing my job." But that sentence shattered like glass on pavement. A woman in the crowd began to cry. A young boy raised his hand in a military salute. A man shouted, "Justice for Doris!" A second voice instantly echoed, "Justice for all!" Within 60 seconds, the parking lot had transformed into a living symbol of truth and community power. And like a wave that could not be stopped, the story began to spread beyond the borders of the town. As the chants of "Justice for Doris" continued to echo across the sweltering parking lot, the online world erupted. Within just 12 minutes of Arlo's arrival, the keyword, Doris Hawkins, shot up to the top 3 trending topics nationwide on Twitter and TikTok. But what stunned the world the most wasn't happening at the scene. It lay hidden within a set of declassified records, decoded 18 months earlier, but never picked up by the media. Doris Hawkins, born in 1949 in Montgomery, Alabama, grew up during a time when America was still deeply entrenched in racial segregation. Her father was a blacksmith, her mother a nurse. In 1977, at the age of 28, she endured a grueling 23-week selection process and became one of the first 5 black women ever admitted into a special Navy training program, the Classified SEAL Division, codename Kappa 3. Over more than 12 years of service, Doris not only survived brutal training programs like SEER, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, and BUD-S, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL, but was also deployed on 9 Tier 1 missions, top-secret operations that only 3% of SEALs have ever been selected to join. One of the most legendary operations she participated in was Operation Silent Flame, a 1984 mission aimed at intercepting illegal uranium transport across the Syrian border. The strike team consisted of only 7 operatives, and Doris was the sole member assigned to close combat and nighttime navigation. The CIA report from that year confirmed 17 mercenaries were neutralized without a single bullet fired by the SEALs. Yet, Doris's service record never appeared on television. Everything she did remained classified under the Phantom Doctrine, a designation for operatives whose contributions could never be publicly acknowledged due to the extreme security and political sensitivity of their missions. Not even Doris's husband, a military physician, knew the details of her assignments. She never told, never boasted, never shared war stories over family dinner. After her retirement in 1992, she went to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs in Mobile, Alabama. Her role, helping young soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan cope with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. More than 400 veterans passed through her care. Many called her the battlefield mother. In 2004, the program 60 Minutes reached out to her, hoping to produce a special episode on the unnamed warrior woman. She declined. "I didn't do it for the spotlight. I did it because I survived, and others didn't." That answer, until today, was known to only a few. In that parking lot, amidst the blaring car horns and whirring cameras, her hand slowly lifted, pulling back the sleeve of her beige cardigan to reveal a trail of small scars running down her right arm. A knife wound from rescuing a teammate trapped in a Guatemalan prison, a burn mark from a tear gas grenade in Mogadishu, and a surgical scar from where a Cold War-era covert communication device had once been implanted. The young man filming trembled as he zoomed in, whispering to himself, "This isn't just about discrimination anymore. This is a betrayal of history." Doris didn't need an emblem on her shoulder. She didn't need to be draped in a flag. She was the living medal. And today, when disrespect forced her out of the shadows, it marked the moment a new generation began rewriting the story of justice, long stifled by prejudice and forgotten truths. 9:12 p.m. at the Gadsden Police Department headquarters. The lights in the main conference room were still burning bright. Every gaze around the table carried visible tension, as if they were facing an unprecedented political storm. At the head of the table sat Lewis Thompson, the 61-year-old police chief who had served in the force for over 3 decades. His hair was half gray, but his eyes remained as sharp as they were in the 90s when he investigated a house fire in the impoverished south end of the city. On the large screen was the video of Officer Gunn confronting Doris Hawkins, replayed from a TikTok clip. The 57-second footage had already surpassed 12.4 million views in under 9 hours. Lewis didn't speak immediately. He rested his arms on the table, eyes fixed on the image of the silver-haired woman being mistreated in broad daylight. Finally, his voice cut through the room, raspy but firm. "We can no longer say this was just one bad officer. This is a reflection of the very system we've been upholding." The room fell silent. No one objected. No one nodded. Everyone was asking themselves, what had I done or failed to do over the years? Lieutenant Carla Jennings, one of the few black female officers in the department, looked directly at Lewis. "It's not just Gunn, sir. It's the entire system that allowed him to exist this long without being questioned." No one stopped him. Louis nodded slowly. He opened a folder on the table and swiftly signed an order. "Officer Gunn is suspended within 24 hours, without pay, pending results of an independent investigation by the Community Oversight Commission." At the same time, he signed another memorandum. All staff would be required to complete retraining on recognizing and preventing racial bias. Officers over the age of 45 would attend an additional mandatory course on communication with the elderly. A new oversight council was established, consisting of 2 war veterans, 1 civil rights attorney, 1 local pastor, 1 community activist, and 1 high school student representative. That very night, the documents were circulated throughout the department. Internal emails flashed non-stop. In a small cafe a few blocks away, Arlo and 2 colleagues from the American Liberty Legal Foundation had already begun assembling a federal case against Officer Gunn. They were compiling the relevant statutes violated. Section 242 of the U.S. Criminal Code, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Section 1983, abuse of power resulting in harm to a citizen's dignity and honor. And most critically, video evidence, eyewitness testimonies, and a documented history of Gunn's prior discriminatory behavior. A short press release was also being prepared for CNN, CBS, and The Guardian. Meanwhile, Doris remained silent. She received an official invitation from the Gadsden City Council to speak at a special hearing scheduled for the following Tuesday. But when asked by an ABC News reporter, she simply said, "I don't need a microphone to speak the truth. I'll answer with action." She returned to her work at a local veteran support center, the place she'd intended to visit for just 30 minutes that morning, to check on an old friend who'd suffered a stroke. But the way she had been treated turned the entire city into an epicenter of reckoning. At the same time, a new hashtag began trending. #Doris is Justice. On social media, thousands shared Doris's story, not for pity, but as a wake-up call. One user commented, "If a living legend like Doris Hawkins can be treated like this, how many people without medals are trampled every day?" Just 4 days after the incident in the parking lot of Gadsden, Alabama, the name Doris Hawkins was everywhere in the media, from CNN's morning news to Trevor Noah's late-night talk show. The 74-year-old woman, once a quiet figure in everyday life, was now being called by a new name: America's silent warrior. But amid the whirlwind of public attention, inside her small kitchen in Edgewood, the lights remained soft, and time drifted as gently as ever. Doris sat in the corner of the table, holding a cup of mint tea, her eyes scanning a stack of letters now taller than 30 centimeters. 403 handwritten letters, delivered within just 72 hours. One was scrawled in a fifth grader's handwriting from Oklahoma. "Were you ever a superhero in a movie? If not, I think you should be." A Seattle Uber driver shared, "I've been called the worst names because of my skin. But because of you, I know that just standing tall is enough to make someone take a step back." And the letter Doris kept by her bedside every night came from a Gulf War veteran. "I used to think no one understood the pain of surviving, but you roared on behalf of those who no longer have a voice." The most emotional of all was Sandra, Doris's daughter, a medical resident in New York. She broke down in tears when she saw her mother's name appear on the nomination list for the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. A nonprofit organization called Civic Torchlight reached out to Arlo and Doris to establish the Doris Hawkins Foundation, an initiative to fund nonviolent dialogue training between police departments and minority communities. In just 10 days, over $1.2 million had been raised from individuals and institutions across the country. At a public high school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a teacher of society and justice used the video of Doris's confrontation with Officer Gunn as a case study on abuse of authority and the art of moral strength through dialogue. As for Arlo, the principled, unwavering attorney, he declined 53 interview requests from television networks. When asked why, he simply smiled. "I just handed the mic at the right time. The voice belongs to her." The following week, at the National Veterans Conference in Washington, D.C., Doris was invited to the main stage. The entire hall, nearly 3,000 people, rose to their feet in applause. The clapping wasn't loud, but it echoed, steady and relentless, for 4 minutes and 22 seconds, a record never before seen in the conference's history. Doris stood still, bowed her head in gratitude, but said nothing, because her silence had already spoken for itself. In a small press briefing with NPR, a young reporter asked, "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Doris smiled, her eyes gleaming behind thin glasses. "I think I'm someone who knows when to stand still and when to step forward." And from that day on, she stepped forward, not in search of fame, not in pursuit of revenge, but to become the foundation upon which a new generation could rise, without needing to shout. 2 weeks after the confrontation that shook America, Doris Hawkins and attorney Arlo stood on the worn stage of the Gadsden Theater, a venue that had been shuttered for 6 years due to lack of funding, now aglow with renewed hope. Over 600 people packed the auditorium, from silver-haired elders to young adults in T-shirts bearing the words, "I know her name." Before Doris stepped out, a voice rose in song, slow, steady, and piercing through the hearts of everyone present. "It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come." Sam Cooke's anthem filled the hall, blending with choked applause and tears unashamedly shed. A former police officer, white with graying hair, walked onto the stage. His voice trembled. "After 32 years in the force, today is the first time I've had the courage to say, we were wrong. Not just once, but in every glance, every action. And Mrs. Hawkins, you made me see that without ever speaking a single word of blame." Doris said nothing. She simply walked up and took his hand, and the entire audience stood, silent, but heavy with meaning. Backstage, Doris's daughter Sandra, along with a team of university students, announced a new initiative called The Quiet Are Not Silent. They had gathered hundreds of videos from people across the country, stories of being overlooked, discriminated against, dismissed, and how they chose to face it. For the first time, Doris accepted an invitation to speak as a keynote guest at Morehouse College, an institution historically reserved for scholars and leaders of high renown. She stood behind the lectern, eyes meeting rows of young black students, and said, "The true enemy of justice is not hatred. It is indifference, from those who see and still turn away." After her speech, 3 young officers approached Doris. One said, "I was planning to quit the force. But because of you, I realized we don't need to retreat. We need to change from within." More than 70 police departments, from New Jersey to Arizona, sent formal invitations to Doris. "We don't need an honorary advisor. We need someone who will point out what's wrong." Doris responded in the very spirit that earned her the respect of a nation. "I won't just speak. I'll listen. I'll ask the questions no one dares ask. And I won't accept half answers." Together with Arlo, she formed an independent strategic advisory board focused on auditing interactions between police and civilians, while launching an intensive 18-week practical training program called Seal of Accountability. In its very first month, 12 cities signed on to pilot the initiative. From the mountains of West Virginia to downtown Boston, communities began organizing Dory's Dialogues, open forums between law enforcement and residents. A single mother in Missouri wrote, "For the first time in my life, I heard an officer say, 'I'm sorry' to my son, and mean it." And the parking lot in Gadsden? The site that once bore witness to humiliation is now Alabama's first living civil memorial. A steel plaque stands there, engraved in bold letters. Here, a woman once silent made justice speak. 9 weeks after the confrontation in the Gadsden parking lot, Officer Gunn walked into City Hall beneath flashing lights and the eyes of hundreds, no longer cloaked in arrogant armor, no gun at his side. Just a man, head bowed, hands trembling, facing himself. As the microphone touched his hand, he took a deep breath and said, "I didn't just disrespect a woman. I disrespected a symbol I had no right to even try to understand. And I apologize, not to erase what I did, but to begin learning from the beginning." No applause followed, but no one turned away, because everyone saw Doris Hawkins, sitting in the front row, her expression unchanged, calm, steady, yet quietly tracking every heartbeat of the truth. Gunn requested a 6-month unpaid leave and voluntarily enrolled in a psychological recovery, community dialogue, and social accountability course, part of the Echo of Honor program established by the Doris Hawkins Foundation. The 13-week curriculum includes modules on civil rights history, active listening, bias deconstruction, and intercultural communication. Gunn became the first former officer to enroll, not as a model, but as someone seeking healing. When asked how she felt, Doris said only one sentence, quoted verbatim by every major outlet. "Real change begins when you dare to learn from your mistakes, not to cleanse, but to rebuild yourself." Not long after, an unprecedented moment unfolded. Police Chief Lewis Thompson, normally reserved and careful, came to Doris's home in full dress uniform. He knelt on one knee and handed her the Gadsden Department's honor flag, a recognition traditionally given only to officers who die in the line of duty. "I'm not giving this to you because you carried a weapon for this country," he said, "but because you used silence to defend the conscience of an entire community." The news spread swiftly. NBC ran the headline, "A flag for her silence, the banner of courage without a gunshot." In the neighborhood where Doris lived, residents organized an unofficial holiday, Doris Hawkins Day. Children drew her portrait in crayon. Elders stitched her name into banners. A group of young artists wrote a rap titled, "She Never Blinked." At the parade, Sandra, Doris's daughter, shed tears in public for the first time. I'm proud to be your daughter, but today I also want to be your student. Doris embraced her, and as the drums rolled from the far end of the street, she shared a memory no one had ever heard. Fallujah, 2004. My team got ambushed. No ammo left. I led them through a filthy canal, across 700 meters of open terrain, not a single shot fired. Not one man fell. A young officer asked, "Weren't you afraid?" Doris simply shook her head. "The strongest weapon is your gaze. Don't tremble, don't retreat, and never bow when righteousness is still standing." 2 years after the incident in the Gadsden parking lot, Doris Hawkins, the woman once humiliated simply for standing in a place deemed not meant for her, stood at the podium in the Pentagon in front of generals, senators, and over 600 veterans from across the United States. The event was titled, "Veterans of Invisible Valor." Doris did not read a prepared speech. She did not speak of titles or personal achievements. Instead, she held a yellowed sheet of paper, trembling slightly in her hand. "I want to read the names of those who quite literally kept me alive over 37 years of service. They are the reason I'm standing here." She read 19 names. Each name was a memory, a sacrifice, a truth never written in any history book. The entire hall stood. No one spoke. But in that silence, there was a collective vow. We will remember. The Quiet or Not Silent initiative, founded by Sandra and her youth group, had expanded to 14 states, collecting, sharing, and archiving over 3,200 personal stories on a digital platform. The content includes videos, handwritten letters, and podcasts that speak not just of injustice, but of courage and hope. A 5th grade student from Chicago sent Doris a letter. "I want to be a Navy SEAL, not to shoot guns. I want to be like you, saving people by standing tall when everyone else bows to bullies." Doris had the letter laminated and placed it next to her Legion of Merit medal. As a reminder, true legacy isn't forged in metal, but in the inspiration it leaves behind. The book, Silent Roar, The Journey of Doris Hawkins, written by Arlo and published by Beacon Press, became one of the New York Times' top 5 most read nonfiction books of the year. More than 40 high schools in states like New Jersey, Minnesota, and Oregon adopted it into their official curriculum for civics and justice. At Arlo's retirement farewell, he said something that silenced the room. "I've argued hundreds of cases, from drug charges to financial crimes. But this one, I didn't need to win. I just needed to be right." Doris officially retired again, not to step away, but to lift others from behind. She moved to a small house in the Gadsden suburbs, opening her doors every Sunday to welcome children for reading sessions and lessons on how to ask questions. Every year on June 2nd, the entire city of Gadsden hosts Justice Dialogue Day, in the same parking lot where the insult once echoed, now a sacred space where generations sit in circles, listen, share, and learn the art of not staying silent. In the center of the city park stands a black stone memorial, not grand, not flashy, engraved simply, "Doris Hawkins." She did not shout. She stood still, and the world had to listen. I hope you enjoyed this story. Like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.